Dungeons emerged as deep, dark labyrinths, acting like cosmic vending machines that dispensed ferocious monsters and untold terror upon the human world. While griffins and massive serpents laid waste to cities, leaving the populace trembling in fear and desperately waiting for a hero who was running late, a quieter tragedy loomed on the outskirts of the Bergrand Empire. A demon wolf cornered a mother and child, baring its fangs with the intent to turn them into a mid-afternoon snack. But before the beast could land a critical hit, a hooded figure intervened with a massive vertical slash of blue energy. The strike instantly deleted the wolf from existence, and the stranger calmly lowered his weapon to ask the stunned survivors if they were all right. Ash was revealed to be the captain of the Bergrand Empire's 13th Squad, stepping up to protect the civilians as his subordinates arrived for backup. With the squad ready, he issued a simple command to annihilate the enemy, and his knights charged into the fray with a unified shout. While the soldiers handled the smaller threats, Ash engaged the alpha wolf, parrying its ferocious lunges with practiced ease. However, the battle escalated when a griffin screeched from above, diving in for a surprise attack. Ash barely managed to roll away from the beast's ground slam, realizing he needed a ranged option immediately. Spotting a pitchfork leaning against a nearby wall, he improvised a solution. He grabbed the farm tool and hurled it with lethal precision, shouting as the makeshift javelin pierced the griffin midair. Ash clicked his tongue in annoyance, realizing the monster invasion was less of a raid and more of an endless convention. Even his lieutenant began to despair at the sheer volume of enemies, but Ash checked on the survivors and immediately rallied his troops, shouting that losing was not an option when the village's safety was on the line. His command reignited the squad's morale, and they charged back into the fray with renewed vigor. The battle raged until nightfall, leaving the streets silent and littered with the corpses of the fallen beasts. Just as Ash wiped the sweat from his brow and wondered if his shift was finally over, the ground trembled, freezing his knights in pure terror. A colossal serpent rose beneath the moonlight, looking down at them like an appetizer. Ash barely had time to acknowledge the new challenger before the massive snake unleashed a torrent of searing flames, engulfing him in a blazing inferno. Ash survived the inferno only to find himself serving as a living toothpick for the giant serpent, barely holding its crushing jaws apart with his sword. While his squad cried out in horror at his precarious position, Ulka kept her cool, drawing her bow and loosing an arrow of concentrated mana. The shot slammed into the beast's skull, forcing it to recoil and giving Ash the split second he needed to escape. Shouting his thanks to the archer, he dashed out of the mouth and immediately pivoted into an offensive stance. With a deafening roar, he unleashed a vertical slash of golden energy that cleanly bisected the monster from head to tail. As the massive carcass crashed to the ground behind him, the stunned villagers finally dared to believe they were safe, cheering for the knights who had saved them from annihilation. The monster rampage was officially suppressed, largely thanks to Ash deciding to play a one-man army and racking up over 200 solo kills. This overwhelming display of violence earned him the terrifying epithet Ash the Annihilator and a VIP ticket to the royal palace. There, the king rewarded his services by bestowing upon him the rank of associate noble. As his squad applauded his rapid ascent up the social ladder, Ash casually dropped a second bombshell. He was getting engaged. While Ulka suffered a complete mental breakdown and begged him to reconsider, Ash explained that a lowly new noble couldn't exactly say no to Lady Rafina, the daughter of a great duke. Ash adjusted his suit, thinking that everything was going smoothly and his rosy new life was just beginning. A classic flag that suggested things were about to go horribly wrong. Ash clinked glasses, celebrating a future that seemed guaranteed to be filled with roses and romance. But as usually happens when a protagonist gets too comfortable, reality decided to humble him immediately. 3 years later, the rosy atmosphere had vanished, replaced by a cold meeting room where his fiancée delivered a blunt status update. She declared the engagement off, leaving Ash stunned and effectively single again. To complete the combo of misery, Ash was summoned before a smug royal who delivered the final strike with a cheerful grin. He announced that Ash was officially expelled from the Knight Order, stripping him of his rank, his job, and his dignity in one fell swoop. Thus, the legend of the dismissed knight began. Lady Laffy Lagan shattered Ash's reality with a single sentence, ending their engagement and leaving him kneeling in desperate confusion. He frantically listed every sacrifice he had made to please her, changing his wardrobe, quitting his vices, and showering her with gifts, but she only looked down on him with cold boredom. She admitted she had simply upgraded to a gentleman from a count's family who could afford more expensive tributes, dismissing Ash as a barbaric commoner she had grown weary of tolerating. When Ash tried to argue that her own father had begged for this union, she twisted his defense into an insult, slapping him across the face with her fan to silence the truth. With a look of pure repulsion, she ordered her guards to drag him out like trash, slamming the manor doors on his last desperate plea. He didn't even get a moment to process the humiliation before 2 knights intercepted him on the street, coldly ordering him to report to the station immediately. Ash arrived at the station hoping for answers, but he was greeted by Mike Librob, a smug noble who promptly expelled him from the order. When Ash demanded a reason, Mike sneered that Ash was an eyesore, hindering both his career and his love life, revealing himself as the very man Lady Rafina had chosen over him. Ash realized this superior officer was nothing more than a rich brat threatened by a commoner's potential promotion. Mike mocked Ash's glare, poking at the metal on his chest and dismissing his life-threatening monster subjugations as nothing special. Ash snapped, seizing Mike by the collar, but the noble calmly played his trump card. If Ash struck him, his friends in the Corps would pay the price. Forced to swallow his rage, Ash released his grip. Mike then ripped the metal from Ash's uniform and crushed it under his boot, lecturing him that refinement, not heroism, defined a knight. With his boot grinding the symbol of Ash's honor into the dust, Mike ordered him to pack his bags and be gone by nightfall. As Ash walks through the corridors to return his knightly equipment, the heavy whispers of the other students follow him, judging him based on the scandalous gossip circulating the academy. Inside the office, a man bluntly reveals exactly why Ash's reputation is in tatters. The word on the street is that his fiancée dumped him because he tried to force her into non-consensual baby roleplay. Ash listens in sheer horror as the story paints Lord Mike as a hero saving the damsel from Ash's supposed diaper fetish, a fabrication so absurd it drives Ash to punch a wall in frustration outside. He laments that years of hard work have been destroyed by such a stupid lie, but he is interrupted by Ulrika, the unit's noble-born mascot. She tearfully begs him not to leave, and just when Ash thinks he has found a sympathetic ear, Ulrika drops a bombshell of her own. With complete sincerity, she shouts that if he really wanted to do baby roleplay, he should have just asked her instead. Ash nearly has a stroke realizing that even his loyal junior believed the rumors, forcing him to frantically deny the allegations while Ulrika stands there looking confused. Ulrika's concern about the future of the Janus unit without Ash triggers a memory of how it all began 3 years ago. Back then, the squad was overworked and undervalued. Miley vented her frustration that despite their desperate fighting, only the noble-born member received a commendation while the rest got nothing. Will, ever the calm intellectual, reasoned that while the Empire ignorantly views dungeons as simple pest control, the gratitude of the villagers they saved was real validation. To solidify their bond in the face of such indifference, Ash told them to be proud, and they decided to name their squad so the battle wouldn't be forgotten. Will suggested Janus, the two-faced ancient god, symbolizing their dual struggle against both monsters and human politics, a name they adopted with enthusiasm. Returning to the present, Ash assures Ulrika that he will always be a member of Janus at heart, but he is done dealing with the imperial nobles. When he announces his plan to leave for a foreign country, Ulrika panics and grabs him, declaring she will follow him. Ash shuts that down immediately with a gentle head pat, reminding her that her noble status is the shield the unit needs to survive. Defeated but compliant, Ulrika extracts an absolute promise that he will write her letters. As the scene settles, Ulrika is left blushing intensely, seemingly more focused on the physical contact and her retained title than the goodbye itself. Ash formally severs his ties with the nobility by returning the medal that proved his lineage, declaring that he has abandoned the Hart's family name. Far from feeling a sense of loss, he stretches his limbs and remarks that a massive burden has been lifted, leaving him feeling completely refreshed. Clutching a travel brochure for the Labyrinth City, he smiles brightly and boards the train, eager to start his new life as a free man. As the steam engine chugs through the countryside, Ash enjoys the solitude of his private cabin, watching the scenery roll by. However, his peace is interrupted when the door slides open and a mysterious man in a trench coat and hat steps inside. The stranger politely asks for a moment of his time, causing Ash to look up in confusion and ask who exactly this uninvited guest is. An older gentleman stood there, holding out a pamphlet Ash had evidently dropped while daydreaming. Ash thanked him, but the man had already clocked him as a foreigner. Apparently, locals didn't stare at the scenery with that much wonder, and in the Empire, this mode of transport was reserved for the wealthy. The gentleman explained that in the Rosebell Kingdom, however, this was just a normal commute. He launched into a history lesson, detailing how the kingdom used to be a monster buffet. To survive the constant dungeon threats, they mastered magic, casting fire, water, and even miraculous healing to keep their limbs attached. As a bonus to all that survival instinct, they figured out how to use monsters as materials, creating magic-powered appliances that revolutionized their daily lives. The old man concluded his patriotic lecture, declaring Rosebell a magic-powered superpower. Ash absorbed the information, silently noting that his home empire was practically in the Stone Age by comparison for ignoring dungeons. As the train announced their arrival at the second dungeon city, Ash gathered his things, ready to see this advanced nation firsthand. On the platform, the gentleman's driver was already waiting. Ash thanked the man for the history lesson, and with a tip of his hat and a warm welcome, the old noble departed. Now solo, Ash stepped into the bustling streets. The city was a marvel, dominated by the towering silhouette of the capital's first dungeon in the distance. He wandered through the market, taking in the sights, until the frantic sound of footsteps broke his concentration. A young woman rushed past him, looking terrified. Close behind, A group of thugs gave chase, shouting threats and demanding she stop. They eventually cornered her in a dead-end alley, leering with predatory grins as they offered her a drink that sounded significantly less optional than a beverage should. The girl's terrified refusal fell on deaf ears as the thug loomed over her, demanding compliance with a predatory grin. Ash stepped in, gripping the man's shoulder and casually suggesting that alcohol was the only reason for his poor behavior. The thug didn't appreciate the unsolicited advice, screaming for Ash to shut up while throwing a wild punch. Ash dodged the clumsy strike effortlessly and countered with a solid hit that sent the man flying. The remaining gang members rushed in, but Ash quickly realized that while these locals were battle-hardened from living in a dungeon town, they were still out of their league. He dismantled their offense with fluid dodges and precise strikes, planting a boot in one face and a fist in another until the alley was quiet. Just as Ash was stretching his wrist, satisfied with the cleanup, the leader staggered back up. With eyes glowing red and pride shattered, he drew a sword, making it clear this wasn't just a fistfight anymore. The thug, having fully committed to his poor life choices, screamed and lunged with his sword. But before Ash needed to lift a finger, a flash of white armor intervened. A blonde knight parried the strike effortlessly, lecturing the bandit that an amateur stood no chance against Ash Hearts, one of the Empire's strongest. This rescuer was Bail Barome, a kingdom knight and Ash's old rival from cross-border exchange matches. Their skills were so evenly matched that their duel record was dead even, making him perhaps the only person in the city qualified to call Ash a worthy rival. The reunion quickly moved to a tavern. Over clinking beer mugs, Ash explained his sudden unemployment and exile. Bail listened, visibly infuriated on Ash's behalf, but quickly pivoted to a solution. If Ash was starting over, he should do it here in Rosebell. Bail smiled and dropped a career change on the table. Ash should become a dungeon hunter, killing monsters and harvesting magic stones for profit. Bail admitted he simply wanted a capable former knight like Ash on the team, promising the pay was good enough to live in luxury. But their recruitment talk was violently interrupted. A soldier burst into the tavern, screaming that monsters were flooding out of the dungeon. The city was under attack. Bail dropped the heavy news that a monster rampage was brewing and the Night Order was desperate for manpower. He extended a hand to Ash, asking his former comrade to join the fray. Ash recalled the brutal reality of a rampage, ferocious beasts spilling out of the dungeon to slaughter anyone in sight. Realizing the threat had to be contained internally, Ash agreed without hesitation. Bail smiled, genuinely relieved to be fighting alongside him again, while Ash humbly promised not to get in the way. They arrived at the Hunter Association, which was currently operating with the organized efficiency of a panicked mob. Amidst the shouting and confusion, they found May, who looked ready to collapse from stress. She reported a massive outbreak of 300 blue apes on the 10th floor. Bail confirmed the imminent danger and introduced Ash as a reinforcement for the defense line. May stared at the civilian-clad Ash with open skepticism, clearly wondering why a random guy with absolutely no credentials was being tossed into a war zone. The other fighters eyed Ash with open skepticism, asking if this random civilian was actually a knight from out of town. Bail immediately shut them down, vouching for Ash's skills with enough authority to end the conversation. They moved to the supply tent, where Ash requested light armor and a simple longsword to maintain his speed. Instead of standard steel, Bail handed him a magic sword, a piece of local tech that functioned as both a weapon and a magical tool. Following Bail's instructions, Ash slotted a mana stone into the hilt. The blade instantly hummed to life, wrapped in a blue aura that multiplied its cutting power significantly. Ash looked at the glowing weapon with the appreciation of a man whose job just got a lot easier. Fully equipped, the group descended into the dungeon. They pushed past the first and second strata, heading deep underground where the monsters grew more vicious. When they reached the third stratum, Ash paused, baffled by the pristine, artificial architecture that looked impossible for a cave system. Bail quickly snapped him back to reality. They were here to kill monsters, not admire the masonry. Bail tried to organize a defensive line at the shutter, but the enemy didn't care for his schedule. The heavy barricade shattered instantly, and the blue apes swarmed in, forcing Bail to scream a desperate tactical tip: aim for the head. Ash acknowledged the advice but quickly realized he might not need it. As the first ape lunged, Ash dodged with casual ease, noting that the monster was moving in slow motion compared to what he was used to. He swung the magic sword, and the blade slid through the beast's torso like it was cutting butter with a hot knife. The sheer power of the weapon rendered Bail's strategy obsolete. Why aim for a small weak point when you can just delete the whole enemy? The onlookers gasped as Ash bisected the monster in a single hit. As he cut down another attacking ape, Bail warned that this specific breed was annoyingly tenacious, but to Ash, they were nothing more than a minor nuisance to be kicked aside. Ash and Bail tear through the dungeon, treating the blue apes less like monsters and more like walking winter coats waiting to be harvested. While they casually discuss the market value of fur, the spectators on the sidelines are left questioning their own existence. They quickly realize the silver-haired helper isn't just some random mercenary. He's Ash the Annihilator, a living legend whose strength rivals the kingdom's 10 swords. As the kill count breaches 200, the math starts to look terrifying. Ash and Bale trade compliments amidst the carnage like they're catching up over coffee, slaughtering 300 monsters while the rest of the party stands around feeling about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. By the time the dust settles, the other adventurers are forced to admit they didn't even need to draw their weapons. Meanwhile, Yuruka is left blushing in the aftermath, clutching her face and obsessing over her senior with an intensity that's arguably scarier than the monsters. At the Royal Knight's headquarters, Ulrika practically vibrated with joy after receiving a letter that finally revealed Ash's location in the Rosebell Kingdom. When Miley and Will returned from training, lamenting that life without their former leader was excruciatingly boring, Ulrika dropped the news that Ash had reinvented himself as a monster hunter. Will noted that fighting beasts was likely an improvement over the prejudice they faced in the 13th Squad, but Ulrika escalated the conversation by casually announcing her immediate resignation from the knighthood. While Will admitted he had already planned to leave to manage his family's business, Miley decided that chasing after Ash was far more entertaining than staying behind. With their priorities set, the trio agreed to head for the first dungeon city, officially disbanding the 13th Squad on the spot with absolute unanimity. Ash arrived at the Hunter Association, where he was immediately intercepted by a receptionist named May who seemed to have forgotten her professional filter. She openly fawned over his strength and handsome looks before remembering to actually do her job and hand him the registration forms. Once the paperwork was processed, May presented Ash with his license, explaining that mandatory check-ins allowed the association to send search parties if a hunter failed to return. However, the safety net came with strict regulations. All monster materials were association property, meaning Ash was explicitly forbidden from skinning beasts to make his own winter coats. May further explained that to prevent intelligence leaks, hunters were legally barred from renouncing their nationality or traveling freely. Accepting the terms, Ash took his license to the first dungeon entrance, passed the security check, and stepped into the darkness to begin his new life. Before Ash could even begin his new career, he collided with a stranger, dropping his license and revealing the beginner's mark stamped on it. The stranger immediately sneered, advising the greenhorn to stay in the shallow end of the dungeon if he didn't want to die, before walking away laughing with his group. Ash brushed off the unprovoked rudeness, geared up, and marched into the dungeon to finally start his new life. On the first level, he encountered 2 young hunters celebrating a kill and asked them what they were doing. They introduced him to slime fishing, a low-stakes hunting method that involved luring docile slimes with carrots and stabbing their cores for easy magic stones. Ash noted that while the surface levels were safe and profitable for beginners, better rewards lay deeper underground. Impressed by the boys' competence, he suggested that if they were confident in their skills, they should try skipping the small fry and heading down to the 10th level. Ash quickly learned that, in the dungeon city, nothing was free, not even casual conversation. The young hunter shamelessly demanded a fee for his consultation, leaving Ash to realize he'd just been hustled by a child. He paid up with a resigned smile, admitting he'd been hooked, before shaking off the loss to head deeper underground, eager to test his blade against real threats. Meanwhile, the arrogant squad that had mocked him at the entrance was facing a brutal reality check. Their confidence had evaporated, replaced by sheer terror as their leader stood panting in the dark, realizing too late that they were hopelessly surrounded by a horde of monsters with glowing red eyes. Subscribe and like the video for the next part.